If we take a look at the readout from an EKG or an ECG, it's going to look something like this. Like so. Right? And each of these different regions sort of represent different things. So this region here, this is what we call the P wave. This is the P wave. Okay? So we can see another P wave down here. Right? The bigger region here, this is known as the QRS complex. And so we can see another QRS complex here. And then lastly, what we can see is this wave right here, which is known as the T wave. So we can see another T wave here. Okay, and these correspond to different events that happen during the cardiac cycle. So your P wave is going to correspond to atrial depolarization. So this is depolarization of the atrial cells. So depolarization or atrial systole. So we'll put that in there. Okay, atrial systole. Your QRS complex is going to represent ventricular depolarization. Okay. So QRS complex is ventricular depolarization or ventricular systole. Right. Then lastly, your T wave is going to represent ventricular repolarization. So this is when the cells are repolarizing. Okay, so this is going to be ventricular diastole. Okay, so what do you notice that we are missing in our cardiac cycle that's not represented in our ECG, right? So what we are missing is, we'll put this in blue, right? What we're missing is our atrial repolarization. So missing is atrial repolarization. So why is atrial repolarization missing? Atrial repolarization is missing because it happens at the same time as that QRS complex. Okay, so it's happening at the same time as ventricular depolarization. But that ventricular muscle mass, right, very thick, so there's a lot more electrical signal in all of those cardiomyocytes that make up the ventricles versus what makes up the atrial walls. So that electrical signal that's happening during atrial repolarization is masked by that ventricular depolarization. Okay, so we can tell sort of what's happening in the heart by this electrical sort of signal readout. Okay, now the first thing that we can do for calculating or looking at the ECG and calculating some metrics is looking at what we refer to as the RR interval. Let me get a different color here. Okay, so we're going to look at the RR interval. Okay, and the RR interval is the timing for one cardiac cycle. So we use RR interval because it's the easiest peaks to see. So here, all the way over to here, right? That's our RR interval. All right, and so we can use that to determine how long it takes for the heart to go through a cardiac cycle. And so we can count the number of cardiac cycles per minute, or make an estimate of the number of cardiac cycles per minute. And we can calculate heart rate that way. The other thing that we can do is we can actually measure the are our intervals and see if they are consistent. So is the time that it takes for the heart to go throughout one cardiac cycle, is it consistent? Because if it's not consistent, that may sort of lead us to some sort of cardiac anomaly. The next thing we might look at is what we refer to as the PQ interval. PQ interval. So the PQ interval, right, is essentially the amount of time for the signal to go from the SA node to the AV node, right? So is it shortened? Is it lengthened, right? What is the amount of time that it takes for that signal to move through? So our PQ interval is, here's our P, right? Here's our Q. So this is our PQ interval. Right? And then the last main one we look at is what we refer to as the ST interval. And this is essentially how much time does it take for the ventricles to go from a state of contraction or depolarization, so ventricular dipole, to the state of relaxation, to ventricular repolarization. Okay, so our ST segment is from here over to here. So, oops, sorry, not the middle. It's the start of the T wave here. And it should be the same thing for the P. I apologize for that. But it should be the end of the P wave to the start of the Q for the PQ interval. Okay? So those are some things that we are going to look at for potential cardiac anomalies. Now, the other thing that we're going to look at is something called cardiac axis. And we're going to use a completely different video to talk about cardiac axis. So make sure, though, before you look at the cardiac axis video, that you understand these different regions of the ECG.